I have to tell you that when I was asked to do this, Caroline did tell me it was stained glass unbound or something, but more recently I was told it was a talk to people starting in their work. So I've got all sorts of advice for anyone starting, which you can ignore as you like. Anyway, that's me, and I'm going to start off doing something I really very seldom do. But if you are in this business and you haven't got all three of my books, I think that's a mistake, and I'm going to tell you why. Just out of interest, I made 22p a copy on my first book, which has sold 35,000 copies over about 20 years. But most of them are available on eBay or whatever it's called, Amazon, for about £2. And I'm a very privileged person because the first book is about what happened, I'm sure you all know this, in the 90s in glass. The second book was about the noughties, and the last book was the other way, no, sorry. The 80s, the 90s, and the noughties. And each of the 360 colour pictures from all the best work, as I thought, around the world. And it talks about it. And what you see there is what Derek was talking about, is the progression from exclusively leaded glass to all the other forms that we currently work in. And I do think it is something we should all understand. Sorry, it sounds like I'm trying to sell you a copy. Couldn't care less. But they're quite. So the second book, the last book is called Colours of Architecture. Big mistake, it should have had the word glass in there. Just a digression, I'll probably read off. When I wrote my first book, it was about 1986, and I'd done, you're not going to believe this, but more than 150 presentations to architects in 1 year, with a little carousel going and showing pictures. I mean, some were 20 minutes, some were an hour. And I thought, there are 6,000 architects in London alone, how am I going to get round all those? So I thought, I'll write a book. I don't think a single architect bought the book, but lots of glass people did. Anyway, so the last book is very much about architects and architecture, and it was in German and all that. So I was, and I'm still vaguely, very, very vaguely, because I wrote most of the books between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., planning to do a fourth book, provocatively titled The Supreme Art. Because, of course, what we all understand, which nobody else has understood, is that actually glass art is the ultimate art, because it has such a powerful impact on every environment. So that goes into a topic. You see, are we an applied art? Are we a fine art, or are we sort of real art? And most of us know that most people think we're not really a fine art, we're sort of some third cousin, which is very sad. I was very privileged to do this window as a project manager for Patrick Heron. That, of course, is fine art. And it's quite a landmark project because it's probably the first large-scale window done without any lead. And it doesn't look very big, but it's actually 5 meters by 5 meters, and it's all done with hand-laid antique glass. So I think if you really want to be a fine artist, you probably have to start exhibiting. And quite a number of artists are doing this. Kate Maestri exhibits almost every year. Autonomous Works. Many years ago I thought it would be wonderful if I knew a very, very rich person who didn't mind losing about £250,000. We'd open a gallery in Mayfair and we'd sell autonomous glass art. This was in the 80s. Now, of course, it's so easy to light work. It would be a wonderful thing to do. Narcissus Quagliata. So these are people who have, to some extent, and of course Brian, do exhibit. And in a way that does convince people in the art world, oh my gosh, you must be a real artist if you're actually exhibiting. Whereas if you're just doing stained glass, well, that's not really quite, we don't really call that art. Because you're only doing commissioned work, so you don't actually have motivation to just make work springing from your own imagination. But it is encouraging. I think Brian Clark actually bought this for his collection. This piece by Harry Clark sold for £135,000 at Christie's in Ireland quite recently, I mean about 3 months ago, so there's hope. Many years ago, I went to Christie's, no, it was Sotheby's auction, and they had 4 bits of stained glass. One was by Patrick Renton, I can't remember the other one, and one was a piece of glass which honestly any of us could have knocked up in a sort of, well, except me, because I can't cut glass, but everything else. Probably in a couple of afternoons. It was just complete rubbish, sold for £2,000. People just had no idea what art was and what art wasn't. It was just a bit of stained glass that was bigger than the other two. And this is just a sort of backlit thing that Don and I did some years ago. But it shows how very easy, and the little white light round the edge was actually a sort of, it wasn't something we expected. It's just usual edge-lit plastic, but it was quite new at the time. So, obviously there are many roles we can all play in this industry. So you can be a craftsman, you can be a manufacturer, you can be an installer, business person, someone like me, glass artist. I sometimes design glass and good mode. Architectural or a graphic artist, or you can be an art consultant. So, as I said, this is designed for people who are starting. But I think, as Derek very eloquently put it, if you don't understand the materials, if you can't do Photoshop, you should retire if you're starting, because it is a language today, an Illustrator. I've always recommended, of course I never take my own advice, but if you're in this business, you should buy yourself a very expensive camera very early on, and you should find out how to use it. Because in the end, most people's career is built on the photographs of their own work. And if, like me, for many years you took an appallingly bad picture, unless you were lucky enough that the client took one for you, you end up with terrible pictures which you can't do anything with at all. So photography is great, if you can be a model maker, great, and I think it helps if you understand something about architecture and art. So, who are our clients? Who are we actually trying to market to now? People have very different strategies. Some people are running an entire business, as indeed most of the people who have been talking today, by entering art competitions. Very, very challenging. I mean, I have won some art competitions, which is how I ended up doing Hong Kong Airport, but I've also entered 10 in America and not had even a reply. And they were quite long documents. So anyway, our clients are property developers. If you can get into transportation, airports and railway stations, academic churches, hospitals, all these things. And very often the intermediaries, the people who will call you up and say, I've got a project that you might like to think about, are architects, interior designers, landscape architects, and perhaps art consultants. Now many of you will say, well actually I've never had a call from any of those people. It's been a local church which heard about me word of mouth, or a client who heard about, which is great. And if you can build a career that way, well there isn't a better way. I'll go past all that. So I just wanted to say something about architecture. Because I got into the business through Brian Clark, and I had a lot of art speak in those days. And of course, people regard ornamentation and decorative art as not art. But architecture these days is considered an art, and this is quite an interesting building because this is David Chipperfield's Madrid law courts. You might notice something that's rather outstanding about these buildings. This is by one of the great architects of today. As you might have noticed, because it's quite a subtle point, of course, aside from the fact that they're in 4 different colours, there are 6,380 window frames. And they're all the same. So does that tell you something about architecture? What really works is repetition. And I think most people would agree that, curiously enough, you may not like them, but actually they are very, very powerful and potent buildings. They do communicate. So you might look at that and think, well, that's exactly the whole point that destroys your case, because Frank Gehry's Bilbao Museum, Guggenheim Museum, doesn't have any repetition. And actually, if you look at it carefully, it really does. An interesting, I'll digress in a moment, but as you can see, it's all traced on these exactly identical rectangular module, which is made, by the way, with folded aluminium. And I went to LA recently for a glass conference, and I thought I must go and see Gehry's Disney Opera House. It's fabulous. And it's the same device, but it's done with what looks like stick-on silver vinyl. So they're absolutely flat. In fact, you barely notice the little lines in between. And it just is nothing. Nothing at all. You just think that is destroyed a building in one go just by trying to save money. You can see how the grid is what sort of communicates. So that's something about architecture, that in our art form, in a way, something that is very repetitive can be very powerful. And in fact, when you go into a church and you see, 14 people in dressing gowns, or whatever you call them, down the side, on either side, actually, they're sort of all the same. Of course, they've all got different faces, but really, it's a sort of the repetition that is the power. So when we're working in architecture, never be afraid to repeat yourself many, many times. And if the client says, well, it's getting a bit dull, say, you wait. When we install it, it'll look bloody brilliant. So a sales point in this current era is that we can, to a modest degree, reduce solar gain and solar things. So this is a building by a very famous architect called Ville-Arretz. And his engineer said to him, you've got a massive problem with solar glare and solar gain. You all know that solar glare means you can't read your computer screen, which we've all been, and solar glare means you've got too much heat, so you need a 50% frit all over your glass. That means a 50% white dot, which we've talked about, screen printing, dots, every dot, we all use that. So of course, being a creative individual, instead of having lots and lots of white dots marching up and down all the same, you realise with white dots you can create photographs, and this became the brand of the building. It's in everything. It's in the concrete, it's in the... actually, look at the top there, it's in there. And I don't know if I've got a picture of it here, but it's in the doors and everything. So these pictures of papyrus plants, which is dried reeds, and as you can see then, of course, you get this wonderful image on the floor, which we all know about. Joachim Pernsmith, the master of repetition, this is such a classic work, it's probably one of the best ones. Architects love this sort of thing, because you're not competing with them, you're just adding to their language. And this is a great quote from Joachim Pernsmith. There's a great deal of confidence and modest restraint, a sort of confidence that looks for the appropriate rather than the sensational. He has a lovely anecdote which he used to tell, is that he did this commission, quite a number of windows in a church, and he arrived for the consecration, and the sculptor, who'd done various projects there as well, was talking to another guy saying, I'm so glad they haven't put the stained glass in yet, because I was just dreading it. And of course the stained glass was all in. But it was just worked so well, he hadn't noticed it. The picture of that is in my first book, so you'll see it's absolutely beautiful. You can find it. And that's just a very classic Joachim Pernsmith. It takes such a lot of confidence to design something so minimal. Because when you present it on paper, your client's going to say, oh, I'm paying all this money for this stupid little thing. But when you put it in, and this is a guy called David Wilson who does very, very beautiful work. An English guy, lives in America, very ornamental, not really fighting, just working with the architecture and embellishing it. And I like to show this. This is Graham Jones's Westminster Abbey pair of windows, which have now got a wall behind them because they've built this staircase, so you can't see it. But what's interesting about it is it's very decorative. Because he doesn't really fight with the Gothic architecture, because he's just got this nice little border. But when you look at it, it's quite sort of Picasso-esque, sort of these elements dancing around, but looking very traditional. And up the middle, again, when you look at it in detail, of course, none of us probably will ever see that without binoculars. But I mean, I have to tell you, I can't do any of this. So whenever I make comments, you're a better judge. From what little I know, that's a masterpiece of both creativity and design and fabrication skills. Just out of interest, what Graham does, of course, is he takes a piece of flash glass, whole piece, blah, 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 leaves it in acid overnight, and then when he's coming to cut up glass, he says, well, I think I'll have the top corner here. So he doesn't always acid etch a piece. So he's creating a dictionary, no. And that's President Obama standing in front of the window, which, interesting enough, has a completely blank window. So when you go in there, even before they built this stairwell about 2 years ago, it always looked very dark, because as you will have experienced if you put a church window in, got a white window next to a stained glass window, it does rather kill off the window. You did design that project, but they never commissioned it. I'm going to skip over this. Oh, I'm going to skip over this. It's just fun, really. An architect designed glass art. Anyway, so everybody can make mistakes. And and that's another architect design project. So this is some of Kate's work. Probably Kate really is the most architectural artist working with architects. And as I was saying, this is a competition which actually I recommended her for because of the art consultant up in Gateshead, who was the person who commissioned The Angel of the North, called me up for advice, which was very flattering, and said, look, I need a glass artist that Foster's will like. So I said, well, she'd only about 3 years out of art school. And you can imagine presenting a design like this, you know, green, 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 oh, bit of blue, oh, little yellow stripe. It's not much. And there were 5 artists who in the end competed. But it does do wonders for the building, because when you actually stand in this building, although it's made up, it's sort of bubble, I can't remember if I've got a picture from the outside, but it sort of foreshortens into a dome, and this coloured weaving thing does really help to express the architecture. And that's other pieces of hers. Again, it takes a lot of confidence. Well, this is a very interesting from one point of view, and I've had 3, I think, of these that I know of specifically, but when British Land completed that building, it took them about 6 months to rent the building. There's a building opposite where another artist by the same client took them 4 years to rent the building. That was done a year before. So anyway, it can be a terrific commercial benefit to developers to put glass art in. By the way, that is just cladding, so there's just concrete behind there. I mean, you know, it's this is all glass art. So then, of course, there is something completely different, like Narcissus quagliatus, stained glass roof in Taiwan. I'm never sure if the red and blue columns weren't a big mistake, but it is actually a fabulous piece, and I can honestly tell you the clients love it. They produced a book with the whole story about it, and actually if you walk around, there's a whole story of creation and humanity, and it's full of stuff. It's really a great piece. Well, I suppose this is just about the thing about Photoshop is that even someone like me who can't draw to save their life can start designing things. So it's terrible, really. Anybody can become an artist with a little modest computer skill. So it is the sort of industrialization of manufacture. And I remember when I started, you know, if people came to me with sort of problems about, you know, we want to do this in glass, only we in our industry could do it. Now anybody can put colour into glass, as you were saying, with film, with digital printing. So in a way, we have to step up our game. Of course, this is a Russian project. Very tasteful. Oh my God, I mean, wouldn't you want to work there? But now this is an exciting scheme. And it goes back to what I was showing about Violet's, the reduction of UV gain. This is, when I see something like this, I feel envy, you know, I wish you'd been there yourself. But anyway, this is an art gallery in China. Sorry. I thought I had other pictures of that. But from the inside, at night, you just see these really beautiful white dots. And in daylight, you do see out. So it's just, you know, you can transform any facade into something really exciting. Mind you, I have said this to probably 300 architectural practices. So it isn't as if they don't know this. And they haven't got back on the phone to me yet next week and said, Andrew, you're the Oxford, we want you. No, I'm working on it. So, what are the contexts where art glass can be, well, okay, we all know this. That's a lovely little window Graham did a few weeks ago or months ago. This is a project I did with, what the hell's his name? Lebrun. Christopher Lebrun, who's the president of the Royal Academy, for the LSE. That is, we all know who it is, but Tom Day, thank you. This really is a one. I must say there's something actually very gratifying I've learnt, which I didn't think probably 30 years, but on the whole, in most fields of life, quality rises to the top. I can't think of people who I thought, wow, they're amazing, why has nobody ever discovered them? They do get discovered, and somehow I think that's very true in most fields. And he is really an exceptional artist. And of course, academic institutions, these are some things I've done over here. This is quite a fun project, only because it's something that don't have. We did this a couple of years ago. This is a light well in a school in Balham, Somerset, where the school had run out of space, as in London you would, so they just dug down, put some classrooms underneath the playground, and they created a light well. And I did one with Kirsty. It's very pretty, it's what they wanted, and of course hospitals. Oh, I did put this in. So this I did last year at a fortuitous moment with Quentin Blake, and it was very nice because it was sort of sponsored, and the whole thing was initiated by the Dahl family, who had the money, and could raise the money. But there are interesting things about that. When it came up, obviously I was aware that we could take these illustrations, which hadn't been made, but when they were made, and we could just put them in film and laminate them between two layers of glass. I was pretty sure that wasn't what they wanted. And actually I made some stained glass samples and also some screen printed enamel samples. And when Quentin Blake saw the two, he immediately wanted the screen printed because they were exactly his image. But actually, some of those panels, they're made of two layers of glass laminated together in a sealed unit, but the front glass is two layers. And we printed on both sides, and one of them had 11 colours. So there is can be quite complicated and not cheap. Most of them had 9 colours, but some of them, I guess, they were on 2 layers of glass, so you get the green and the yellows mixing to create various greens. And that's a hospital sort of sculpture that I did. And of course, we used to do a lot of corporate art. That one's still there. I saw it only about 2 years ago. British Gas Boardroom with Graham Jones. Actually, it's gratifying. They moved office about 4 years ago, and they took the whole thing with them, and they asked us to take it out and reinstall it. So, but I have to say that on the whole, when you're not working in churches, quite often you walk past a building and you realise it's been in the skip, gone. And I did do a really, really nice thing once with a Time Life building on the corner of Bruton Street and Bond Street. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry, we thought it was just plastic. And it was a beautiful laminated antique glass. It was a really beautiful project. So, and this happened to Brian Clark, happened to anybody. So I can warn you, that's why working in churches, at least they tend to keep it for a while. Obviously hospitality, this is the Mayfair Bar, where if you want to go and spend a mere £15 on a small glass of wine, it's always open to you. As well as the girls that pop up the bar. It's on the corner of, just south of Grosvenor Square. But I designed this curved thing, which was all these glass rods, that's quite fun. And these curved glass walls. Stunt glass is something we haven't even talked about, but you know, when in the 80s that didn't exist. It really came in sort of in the mid-90s. Now it's very big, but it is rather interesting because, as we were talking about, if you put stained glass inside a double glazed unit, it sort of had it really because you get the reflection off the glass. And in fact, anything you do, even with screen printing, you do get reflection on the glass, which does create this very manufactured, rather dead product. But if you do slump the glass, you do get that sort of animation, and it can be a very, very light effect. Sorry. Actually, this is a project at the bottom there, and I did this with Graham 25 years ago. That was the middle window, so you can see the sort of the top window, that's anyway, the bottom. And it was done in '92. Many of you won't remember what was happening in '92, but there was a massive property recession. I mean, you just couldn't rent anything. They rented that whole building in under a year, and it was 65,000 feet or meters, I don't know. You can see it's quite big. And they did call me up. I wish I'd had money at the time. I'd have commissioned a study and sort of said, you know, right, I want this in paper, you know, I can show people. But they said it was entirely the glass. When you walked into this reception, this whole blue band was very cleverly done because you've got a huge area, but again, you know, not treating the old area, but creating this blue band. That was where And of course there's public art like this, which is done digitally. See, I mean, this is very frightening. I mean, that's 270 square meters, probably cost £200 a square meter to make. But very, very powerful because it's completely opaque. It's the thing about digital printing as a ceramic. It's completely opaque. There isn't a transparent. I did get a call once from the people who make the ink, Diptech, saying, Andrew, I'm just showing off here, so I'm so grand. They called me for my advice. Anyway, do you think we should start researching whether we should make transparent enamel? I said, absolutely no way. No, there's no market for it anywhere at all. I was really alarmed. I thought, well, that's it. We're really going to target. And this is Martin Donlin. If any of you don't know, he really is competing with Brian Clark. He must be doing 6-7 projects every year in America, and they get bigger. Although I don't think any of as big as this, but this is all laminated antique glass on these really huge airport. See, it's Indianapolis Airport.
Just say what's the name was again, Martin?
So, Martin Donlin. Donlin, yeah, look up his website. Now, he gets all his work by entering competitions. But somehow he's sort of got his leg over the under or in, or whatever you do with your leg. But anyway, he's in there, and he seems to have. But he is. He does create some really wonderful pieces. Actually, this is a piece that starts at the bottom, on the floor below, completely opaque because it's just clad in concrete, and very delicately it moves from opaque to transparent on this corridor, which looks sort of, when you see it, like many things, when you see it well done, you think, well, it can't be that difficult. But if you actually had that brief, you'd find it very hard to go from something that's just totally dead, reflective, to something that's transparent. And it took me quite a while to realise that that's what he'd done. Just looked lots of pictures of it, and being seen there. That is one of my own pieces of public art. Of course, I always get help, like somebody had to help me with some part of it. But anyway, it's dichroic film with things. And finally, this whole thing of landscaping. So this is a project Kirsty and I worked on about 10 years ago, where we were asked to do these 8 external panels, they're 4 meters by 2, to create public space. People talk a lot these days. I mean, the last decade, creating welcoming space for people, about humanizing the public area, and all the public realm, all these, and a lot of public art competitions are about the public realm. Glass is an excellent medium for this because it's indestructible, it's easy to clean. When I say it's indestructible, obviously anything can be vandalized, but I always remind people, any of us could walk down Regent Street tomorrow with a hammer, and we could break every window. We don't. Well, speaking for me, so I own the whole day. But it could be done. So when people say to you, oh my golly, but I mean, will your work be vandalized? You just say, well, how many shop windows have been broken in your high street recently? And they'll probably say, funny you should say that. No, they don't. So if you keep a place well, anyway, this is a lovely, lovely project. As you can see, it's 50 yards from the North Sea. And it's got these lights at the bottom, and it's printed on the outside, so you get no sort of semi-matte surface on one side, and a more transparent or reflective surface on the other. And the reason for that is so that the lights work like this. And actually, of course, it looks much better at night than in day, because at night time it's all you can see, which is what we approve of. Who wants to look at anything else? And particularly the famous Brixton Spa, Bridlington Spa, where Cliff Richard used to sing every year. And they look, this is Kirsty's design, of course, just the same from both sides. But I mean, actually, I'm doing quite a lot about external work at the moment. I've got 2 projects in Hong Kong. I don't know why I've got my little frozen fountains in today, but they're sort of made of fused glass little sculptures. They're about 2.5 meters tall, or they can be, or I could make them bigger. And finally, airports, railway stations, and so just to remind you, these are all the places where we can work. So there's a few places for us. So there's got to be places somewhere. So I could tell you the whole story of that, but I'd applied for that, and it was 40 metres by 7.5, which is, I thought, was rather breathtaking at the time. And still, unfortunately, awed by the size of this piece. Because I haven't done anything quite so big, and that was 30 metres by 7.6. And just out of interest, the way we made that is I have actually got a section at the back, but I think I won't bore you with it all. But every piece of glass is slung to its own texture, and the top layer is airbrushed and fired with enamel in several colours, yes? And then the back layer, because of course it's a laminated glass, is a digital print. So a lot of these little fiddly little detailed lines are all done digitally, and the front, big powerful stuff. But one of the reasons, if not, although actually the original brief did ask for stamped glass, and all the other people who entered the competition didn't present that as an option. So we think that's probably why we won. But one of the things is you don't get any of that reflection off the glass. So when you stand and look at it, it looks much more like a painting, because it's actually, although it isn't actually matte, of course, but the texture doesn't reflect the way industrial glass does. I think that is my last image. So the conclusion of all that is there is a great deal that glass artworks can contribute to commerce. What else did I say? Oh, lifestyle and design, to sustainability even, and to happiness, if only for us. Despite things we might sometimes think, I believe this is an industry with a great future. Because there are so many places we can work, there are so many ways we can work, and we just have to wait for the phone to ring. I'm done. I'm done. Unless you want to. That's it. Unless you want to.